All right, welcome back, guys. You guys are absolutely crushing it through this playlist. Like, if you followed along so far, I hope there's a lot of knowledge that you feel like you're learning, because this is the real deal. This is how we build real world applications that are real time, remote database, all that good stuff. This is how we do it. And I hope you guys are feeling a little more confident by this point. However, one thing we have not covered yet is listeners. This is probably the most common question that I get from people on this channel and I see in forums. How can I update my data in real time? So of course we can write fetch requests to fetch from our server every second, every 2 seconds. But really what we want to do is attach listeners to the server so that when the data gets updated on the server, it funnels back into our app in real time. So this is perfect for things when the device that a user is holding does not know whether or not the data at the server is getting updated. So for example, if a user opens your app and they have to go to a new screen and you're just going to load a bunch of data for that user, we can do a single fetch request on Appear and it loads. But if maybe it's a chat app and the user goes into a chat, if we just fetched all of the chats from the server when the screen appeared, we're not going to get the new updates as other users are sending that data to the server. In a chat app scenario, we would actually want to attach a listener so that every time the server gets updated, it pushes back into our app automatically, and we don't have to sit there and refresh, reload, refetch, and all that nonsense. So that's what we're going to do in this video. Unfortunately, there is no async await version of this, at least not yet. So what we're going to do is first write the code as is with escape enclosures, and then we're going to convert it to a Combine publisher to make it a little more Swift friendly. Hopefully in the future they release some sort of async await version, and if they do, I'll try to add another video, but for now, this is how we're going to have to write our code. So again, if you do not know what escape enclosures are, or if you don't know what Combine is, I have videos in the Continue Learning playlist that cover both of those. Go check those out and come on back. But if you are ready, we're gonna write some really awesome, sweet code in this video. I use this in production all the time. I think you guys are gonna really like it. At the end of the video, let me know what you think. I think this will be the last Firestore video, I think finally. In the last video, we did a lot of setup for what we're going to get at right now. And so we built our app so far pretty well. So we don't really have this problem, but we're going to kind of talk about it as if we do have a problem in our app right now. So basically, every time I go to the favorites tab, we call favorites view appeared, and we run this function to get favorites, right? And that's actually fine. It's probably what we want. So if I add a favorite, let's do the HP Pavilion, and then I go to the favorites tab, it adds it perfectly. And so if I remove it, what we're calling is when we remove a function, we're recalling fetch favorites, and then it fetches again and notices that that one's gone and just updates the results. And that's working perfectly. There are situations in apps, not this one right now though, where data might be getting updated and the app doesn't know that it needs to do another fetch request. So in our sample here, imagine that we had this favorites screen, but imagine maybe these favorites were you and your family or your friends had a shared list of favorites, right? And so if I was on another device and I was updating our shared favorites list, at which case obviously we would want to put the collection somewhere else, not in the user profile. But if I were to update this list, not from the app, but from somewhere else, right? I could add a document with the ID, the correct data. So we can add in a product ID. Let's do product number 5. It's an integer, I believe, and a field of date created with a timestamp. You can do right now. Save it. And you'll notice that the app did not update because the app doesn't know that it needs to refetch the data when it changed in the database. The app just knows that every time this view appears, fetch the data. Similarly, if I were to delete one of the documents that the user currently has, like this one, the app doesn't know it got deleted because the app is not listening to the database in real time. Now, if I go back and then I switch
and come back and it refetches, obviously it works. But there are situations like this where we want the app to actually update in real time. The most common use case for this is like a chat app. If somebody else is sending messages, you don't know when they're going to send a message. You want to listen for updates at the database. You don't want to be refetching data every 2 seconds to check for chats. You just want to listen to the database, and when the database gets updated, send us that newer data. Another use case here is like, imagine I had 2 different devices that both had the app open at the same time, right? On one device, if I changed it, the other device doesn't get that update until I go and refresh the screen. So what we want to do is now change our loading behavior on the favorite screen to basically be automatic and listen to the collection rather than just manually fetch when we appear. So how do we do that? Well, first let's go back into our code to where we have and we can delete this favorites view appeared printout. Let's go back to where we have, it's in the user manager, we have this function to get all user favorite products. And right now it's just a query, and then we get the documents once. And what we're going to do is write another function that says get all user favorite products. Except this time, let's change the language to actually add listener, and then we'll do for all user favorite products. So we're going to add a listener rather than just a get request, which returns us an array. We're going to listen at the database and then continually return the products back to the application. So just like up here, we need the user ID. And then we obviously need to reference the collection. So we'll paste that here. And this time we're going to add snapshot listener, which we have not done yet. Now, one thing I do need to point out here is that these snapshot listeners are not updated for async await. So the user ID, and then we're going to add snapshot for the listener here. So I'm going to click enter on this completion handler, and this will give us a query snapshot and a potential error. So let's query snapshot and an error. All right. And now when we get the snapshot, first thing we want to do is check for documents. So similarly to when we get documents, inside the function of get documents that we wrote a couple of videos back, we get the snapshot and then we loop on all the documents inside the snapshot. It's the same thing. We're getting a snapshot back right now. We're going to check if there are documents, and then we're going to loop and map them, basically. Except we're just doing it in a completion handler at this point because this is a listener. And the reason it's a listener is because this closure here can execute more than one time. So anytime basically there's a change at this collection, this snapshot listener is going to execute. Anytime something gets added to that collection, this is going to execute whatever code we write in here. So if it's a chat and everyone's adding messages to the chat, every single message is just going to execute this with a new snapshot. And so when we get a snapshot, the first thing we want to do is check for documents. So we'll say guard let documents equals snapshot query snapshot dot documents. Else, let's just print out no document for now. I don't really care about the errors here. And then we want to convert our documents to products. So the same way here, we did the documents.map, and then we called document.data as self. I'm just going to copy that bit of code. So the same thing, we mapped our documents to a type T of product. Here, we're just going to say let product of type. We want an array of user favorite product. That's what we're getting at this collection. And we're going to set it equal to the documents. Sorry, this is documents. This is an array of documents. Compact map. Remember, compact map is the same thing as map. You transform a type from query document snapshot into whatever element that we want. And we want to convert it into a user favorite products. And we're using compact map, which means if any of them don't convert, we're just going to ignore them. We're not going to throw an error. It'll just remove it from our resulting array. And so we're going to compact map and press enter here. This will be each document snapshot. And we're going to return the document snapshot .data as, we're going to try to cast it as a user favorite product .self. When we do this, we have to try to actually do it. So we'll add the try keyword in. We'll make it optional so that if it is nil, the compact map will just remove it from our array. We can become really good developers here by one-lining this as well. So I can just say let products equals documents.compact map, open the brackets. I will reference $0 for the first item for the document snapshot. And we're going to call .data as user favorite product .self. And of course we have to try to do that. And so now we can one-line it. And now we just want to return this product array back to our application, right? So before we have a return of one product, but now with this, we can't just return because this is actually asynchronous, this block here. So we need to add a completion handler. So we're going to add in a completion of type escaping, meaning it's going to escape out of this function. And this will be a function that returns void. And the function here is going to take in an array of products. So we'll give it an array of, we'll call it products, should be an array of user favorite product. Now we can call our completion handler, pass in the products. Again, this is escaping because we're going to call this function once, right, to add the listener. This will add our listener. And then this closure is going to continually execute over time throughout the rest of its lifespan. And so while this is executing, this is executing and calling our completion, which is this function here, and it's calling it separate of when we started this, right? This gets called at one time, and this completion handler gets called on the return back. And so it's escaping because it is outliving the original function, right? We're going to call this way after this. Anyway, I'm not going to get into completion handlers right now. I have other videos on my channel about that. Let's try this out and see if it works. So let's go back to our products view, or our favorites view rather, favorite view. And instead of calling get favorites, I'm going to add a function called add listener for favorites. Open the brackets. And we're going to user manager shared dot add listener for user favorite products. We need to get that user ID. So let's get that auth data result up here. Pass in the auth data result.uid. And then we'll get this completion, press enter on it. This will be the products that we get back. And we're going to set user favorite products equal to the returned product. All right, we're going to get this error right, reference to self. Again, what that means is we're calling this function at one point in time, and this function is then returning at a different point in time because it is asynchronous. And when this function returns, the compiler does not know if this class is still going to be allocated in memory. If this class is deallocated, then this obviously, when this function executes, it wouldn't know what to do. And so if we put that hard reference of self in here, then we are telling the compiler that we're not allowed to deallocate this because we have this alive. And so for as long as this might be coming back, this class would have to stay alive. This is called a strong reference. But chances are, if we want to deallocate this, we want to ignore the result of this returning back. And so most of the time, we want to make these weak references, which is basically telling the compiler that when this returns, if self is nil, it's just a nil value, and we're going to handle that by not doing anything because this will be nil. Let's make this optional, and we'll just do a guard let here. Guard let else return. I think that's fine. And let's add the listener into our code here. So on appear, we're going to call viewModel.add listener for user favorites. Now you saw in the last, when we played around, the on appear was called multiple times, right? And so if we're adding a single listener, we only want to add it once. We don't want to add it 100 different times. Then we're listening many times to the database. So really we want is just on first appear. And so we can create a little at state private var did appear of type bool, set it equal to false. And then on appear, we'll say if did not appear yet, add listener. And then when we add listener, we'll say did appear equals true. Pretty cool stuff. All right. And now let's actually comment out these. Let's comment out the get favorites because we're not using it anymore. Let's run our app and see if it works. So we can get rid of this here, right? So after we remove it, we no longer need to refetch. We should automatically be listening to it already. So anytime there's an update, it's automatically doing it in real time. We're not refetching it manually. All right, got my database here, got my app here. Sweet, this is working. And so let's delete one. I'm gonna delete it. And in real time, it happened. I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to refetch. It just happened. Let's add one. Add another. It's happening in real time. If I come in here and I come down here and I delete one of these, it's happening in real time, right? We don't have to manually update our app at all. It's just listening to the database. And every time the database changes, we're listening to those changes and it automatically populates on our app. So this is what you want to do if you're having like a chat app. Different people are sending messages. You listen to the chat collection and then you get these in real time. We actually may or may not be making a chat app in the next playlist. And so we'll get some real use case of how this works. All right, a couple things before we wrap up this video to make our code just a little bit. Let's jump into it real quick. All right, so coming back to user listener favorite products. All right, first problem we have is that actually that we have no way to cancel this listener. So in our app right now, these favorites is fine. Every time I'm using my app, I want to listen to this and it works. But you can imagine a chat app, right? Where you have to go into the chat. And when you click into the chat, you listen to it. But when you click out of the chat, you want to stop listening, right? Because if the user's not in there anymore, and the user's not going to see that screen anymore, you don't want to continue listening and getting those updates back in your app. You want to cancel the listener. And so how do we cancel that? And so what we want to do is basically get a reference to this listener and then just cancel the listener. So when we create it, we can actually say let listener equals this. And we can see that the listener is actually of type listener registration. And so for now, let's just store the listener up here in our file. So we will say maybe, where are we going to put it? Here, and we'll say private var user favorite products listener of type listener registration, and we'll set it equal to nil to start. And then we can come down here and we can set self dot user favorite products listener equal to the listener, right? And then we can create another function in our code, remove listener for all user favorite products. And all we need to do is then reference that listener, which is optional, and we'll just say remove. All right, it's that simple. We get a reference to the listener and then we remove it. Now I'm doing it locally in the user manager. Sometimes you might want to actually return the listener back to the application, hold it in the class in the application, and then maybe pass that back in on if you want to cancel it. We can also just change this so we can set this in one line of code. We don't need this anymore. And so now we're adding the listener and then we can cancel the listener. We don't really have a use case in our app where we need to cancel the listener. So I'm not going to go ahead and actually do that. But if you had a chat app, when they leave the chat, you want to cancel that listener. Otherwise, it's going to still execute in the background. All right, what else can we talk about here? One other thing we can do is that we can actually see basically the diff between the differences that we get in this query snapshot. So we're listening here, and over time, as the collection changes, this is going to continually pump back all of those documents. But between each of those publishes, what has changed? We don't really know. In our app right now, we don't really care. We're just going to convert them all back to product and send it back to the app. But in some apps, you might want to say, well, if something is new or something has been removed, do a specific action. And so how do we get access to that? It's actually in the Firebase docs. They have in the get real-time updates section. It's as simple as this little bit of code here, which I'm just going to copy and paste. All right. And this will be our query snapshot, which is optional. And so what this is looking at the snapshot, looking at the changes of each document. And then for each change, find what the difference is. And the diff is going to either be type added, modified, or removed. And cities, their product, right? And so if I run my app now, we should get these cool printouts to see what's actually happening in the return. So when I load the screen for the first time, they're all looking like they're new products, right? But if I go and I remove one, we can see the update in real time. Sorry, I added one and we saw that it was a new product, right? Boom. And if I delete one, we can see that it was removed from the products. So the diff is telling us exactly what is changing. We don't have any logic for actually changing the document, but if I were to go into our console here, let's just say I edited this product ID for some reason, right? I changed it to maybe 15. It's going to update. It's going to update in real time, and it's going to tell us that the product was modified. I did just notice that the UI did not update, and that is because we are basing our UI on the ID of the document and not the ID of the product. So the cell did not know to update the product. But if I changed the actual product ID to something else, it should know an update. Anyway, that's not important right now. Delete that document because it's got a bad ID now. The cool part is just that we can see the actual diff on these listeners. Sick. We're going to do one more fancy thing just because we've been writing some incredibly cool code in this series. But we're going to convert this listener into a publisher so that we can then use it then as a Combine publisher, which I have done a lot on my channel. If you don't understand what escaping or Combine is or anything along those lines or any of the difficult things that we've done on this channel, I have other videos on my channel that explain all of this, which is why I'm not taking all of the time to dive into all of this. For example, on my channel, I have a video called, for example, in the advanced learning playlist, I have a video about advanced Combine publishers and subscribers. And what we're going to do right now is create one of those advanced publishers. So if you don't know what Combine is and you want to get interested in it, I would probably check this out. But if not, we're just going to jump into the deep end of Combine right now and try to convert this to a publisher. If you've never used Combine before, I also have a video in the Continue Learning playlist that is just like an intro to Combine here, which I would also obviously recommend. All right, let's get into it. Enough talking. Let's copy and paste this. Let's delete this document changes part for now. And in Combine, there are two types of publishers. There are pass-through publishers and there are current value publishers. To get access to them, we need to import Combine to this file. And so there is we'll call it publisher. And we can set it equal to a current value subject. A current value subject is a publisher that's going to produce values over time, and it has a value at the current state. So it has a starting value. Alternatively, there is a pass-through publisher, pass-through subject, which does not have a starting value, and it only just publishes through the publisher. So this is the one we want now because we don't have starting array of products. We just want to take whatever products are coming and then pass them back to the application. When we create a pass-through subject, we need to add a type. What kind of data is it going to publish back to our app? And of course, that's going to be an array of user favorite product. And we need to give it a possible error type. So we'll just add in the word error here. All right, and now we're going to call this collection, this query snapshot. And when we get these products, instead of just calling a completion handler, we are going to instead access the publisher that we just created, and we're going to send a input. We're going to send an array of products into the publisher. So think of this as something that's like waiting. It's just listening for values. And then we're going to send a value every time we get it. So we're going to publish a value to this publisher. And the cool part about this is going to be that we no longer need this completion handler. So we can delete it, and we can immediately return the publisher back to our application. So what kind of publisher is this? It's a pass-through subject user favorite publisher. And so we're going to return the publisher back to the application. All right, so what happens here is we create this publisher, and then we execute this query snapshot listener. And this is going to return back at a later point in time. And when it returns back, it's going to publish to this publisher. But this line of code is going to execute immediately after this line of code, basically. So this closure is asynchronous. It's happening later in time. Everything outside of this, so down here and up here, happens synchronously. So we're going to create the publisher. We're going to tell it how to send products to the publisher. And then we're going to return the publisher back to the application immediately. So when we call this function, we're actually just going to return back that publisher immediately. And then all we need to do is listen to that publisher on our view. You can take it one step further. And so we can actually just create a type erased publisher. So rather than being as specific as this, that it is a pass-through publisher, we can just erase to any publisher. So now it becomes an any publisher, which is just a little more generic, a little easier to use. And we can put it in any publisher here. I think that's pretty cool. Let's try this out in our view before we move forward. So I'm going to go back to my products serve favorites view. All right, so instead of having to deal with this closure now, I'm going to comment this out, and we're going to we'll say user manager shared, add listener. We're going to look for this one, and we're just going to pass in the auth data result.uid. All right, and now we can use our regular combine completions, right? We can just sync the value, right? So this will be our completion, which we're not going to worry about right now because we're never calling the completion. And this will be our returned product. Again, and just like the weak self here, we want to put a weak self here because this is a asynchronous closure. And then we're going to set self.favoriteproducts equal to favorite products. And we're going to basically store this in a cancelable. So we will import combine and store this in a private var called cancelables, which will be a set of any cancelable. And then we will store this in here. Let's build and run, see if it works. Again, we're just doing all of this to get some practice writing really cool code, writing difficult code in Swift. None of this is required. Our first line of code was just as efficient as this one. It's just we're just hacking around here. Hopefully it does work. And looks like it's working because we got our data. Let's add some more data into that array. Hopefully it continues to work. Awesome. Let's remove one. Cool. Let's make our code even better because we are expert developers. And let's check this out here. So this user favorite collection, add snapshot listener. And essentially, what if we wanted to do this whole same publisher thing, but for a different product type, right? So a couple of videos back, we added in the product manager, we added a bunch of extensions to query so that we could get all of our documents, not just as products, but as any type that is decodable. And I want to do the same logic for this publisher now. I want to be able to add a publisher for any type, not just user favorite products. And so we're going to copy this. We're going to go back to our query extension, and we're just going to add to this a little bit. So I'm just going to paste this down here just so I have a reference to what it is. And let's create a func, and we'll call this add snapshot listener. So the same wording as this. And it's going to be a function that returns us any publisher type error. Pass that in here. All right, and let's cut our code and let's paste it in here. All right. Pass-through subject we do not have access to because we need to import Combine to this file. So let's just import Combine. That should go away. All right. The user favorite collection, we're now writing this to do it on any query because we are in an extension of query. So the same way we have self up here, we're just going to call self, which is the query that we are on. This user favorite product listener, we don't have access to in our extension because it's going to be a different listener every time we call this. So really what we're going to want to do is pass the listener back to the application. So we're going to call this let listener and set it equal to this listen. And so when we return this back, we're going to return back the publisher, but we're also going to return back a listener, which is a listener registration. So here we're going to return not only the publisher, but also the listener in case we need that listener to cancel the listener later on in the future. All right, and now we just want to make this generic so that we can do it with any type, not just user favorite products. So we're going to pass in the same thing as we did earlier, some type, and we're going to tell it what type we want it to convert to. And so that type is what we're going to return, and that type is what we're going to publish, and that type is what we're going to decode the products into. So it's not really products anymore. It's just going to be, we can keep it products for now, but really we could just call this like data. But I guess we call it products up here as well, so it's fine. And we're going to convert this to type T. Again, this function does not know if T is decodable or not. So just like up here where we had to tell it that T is decodable, here we're going to run this function and tell it we're only doing it where T is decodable. This is some cool code, guys. I hope you guys agree. Now let's try out our cool function, add snapshot listener, and get our publisher back. So I'm going to go back to our user manager, and let's just copy and comment that out for now. Add another one. And so this time, we don't need to do all this code in here. All we want to do is get the collection that we want to go to. So it's this. I'm going to delete all this code, and we're going to say what are we returning from that function? It is a publisher and a listener. And we're going to set it equal to get products collection dot add snapshot listener as, and we'll do user favorite product dot self. I'm going to two-line this here. So now this is super reusable, right? We can just, any query that we want, we can just put the query in here and then add snapshot listener, and all of a sudden we got that publisher back and we're good to go. And so if we wanted to set, what do we set up here? Self.userFavoriteProducts listener, we can still do that, equals the listener, and then we can return the publisher back to our application. Something like that. Chances are you probably want to return the listener actually back in this function as well, back to the view model. We don't need to deal with it right now. I love how simple this gets though, because in the same way now in our product manager, right, we have all these functions where we wrote like, get documents as. In the same way we do that, we can now do .add listener as. Right? So it's literally that, and we can do it on any query, right? If we're filtering, if we're sorting, we have unlimited options, basically. All right, let's try this out and see if it works. Let's run the code. The app is launching now, and it looks like it's working. Let's delete something. It's still working. Let's add some more. Let's add a bunch of perfume oil. Actually, no. Where's my tree oil? I need that tree oil. Yeah. Oh man, this is good stuff. We need to get a bunch of these for only 12 bucks. Oh my God. Sweet. Looks like it's working in real time, and I have no complaints. We wrote some really, really cool code, guys. I hope you agree. Last final thing I want to do in this video, just because in this playlist, I feel like we got so fancy with our code. It's kind of fun. We're going to go to the favorites view. And one thing I want to point out is this, what do we do? This did appear method, right? We added a quick bit of logic here for basically only running this the first time that this appears. And we can actually just make a modifier to do that for us every time, right? Because what if we wanted to do this whole only appear once on every screen, right? I don't want to have to keep creating the state, keep creating the if did not appear. I would rather just simplify that. So what we can do is actually create a custom view modifier. Again, if you don't know what custom view modifiers are, I recommend my advanced learning playlist. Literally the first video is how to create custom view modifiers. If you liked what we just did with Combine, again, that video is later on down here, advanced Combine. And also in this playlist is a whole bunch on protocols and a whole bunch on generic, which are right here. So generics, we do a whole video on. We used generics when we used the type T a couple minutes ago. That was a generic. So go ahead and check those out if you're confused at this point. Last but not least, let's do a custom view modifier. So we're going to create a struct just like we create a view, except we're going to call this OnFirstAppear view modifier. Instead of conforming to view, we're going to conform to view modifier. And it basically works the same way as a view, except the body has a bit of content inside. And the reason it has content inside is because instead of just being a new view, it is a modifier on an existing view, which is the content. So this is the existing view that comes before it. So when we have code in your view, right? Here we're creating a new view for the first time. But when we call this function, we are actually taking the view before it, which is this whole view, as the previous content, and then adding a modifier on top. And so here we're just taking that previous content and adding a modifier on top. So we're going to take that content and then we're going to add a .onAppear function. In the same way we have up here where we did the did appear, I'm just going to cut that, paste it down here. And we're going to cut this onAppear logic here, paste it here. So if did not appear, we want to run some action and then we'll set did appear to true. And the question is, what action do we want to run? Well, we want to make this generic so we can run any action. So we're going to actually inject an action on here. We're going to say let perform of type, and it's going to be any function that returns nothing. And if we look at the .onAppear, we can see that it is a function that returns void, and they made it optional. And so let's do the exact same thing, a function that returns void, and it's optional. So a function that returns void, and we'll wrap it and make it optional. And then here we're just going to perform, which is optional when it appears. And now with this view modifier, we would be able to do something like this, where we add a custom modifier. We can add in the OnFirstAppear view modifier and perform an action. And we can put our code right here. But this doesn't look as clean as the onAppear does. And that's because the onAppear is a view extension. And so we can just extend view directly and create a func called OnFirstAppear. And OnFirstAppear is going to add that modifier that we just created with the OnFirstAppear modifier. And we want to pass in an action here. So that same action and perform, we're going to inject into this function. And we're going to just pass this in here. So this function is going to add the modifier and return back to the view, the updated view with that modifier attached. So we're going to return a view, some view, back to the application. All right, now we can call .onFirstAppear, so it only runs the first time it appears, and we can add viewModel.add favorite listener. Let's build, let's run, let's check if it works. You guys are getting a crash course in like everything Swift in this playlist. I thought it was going to be strictly Firebase, but it has turned into like everything. So I hope that's a good thing because it's definitely added complexity to these videos. Let me know in the comments if I'm going too difficult. Anyway, looks like it's still working and everything is going well, right? Awesome. All right, that is it for this video. We are now experts at Firestore. We literally covered pretty much everything in Firestore that I could think of, at least. We learned how to make everything from collections to products to sub-collections. We looked at pushing data, pulling data, reading, writing, updating, deleting. We looked at arrays and maps. We looked at filtering, sorting, filtering and sorting together. We looked at how to paginate results, and we even looked at how to listen to a collection and get updates in real time. Of course, my favorite part of this entire Firestore section, though, was in the product manager. We wrote these insanely cool functions that are extensions of query. Actually, before I wrap this up, let's get a little bit more organized now that we wrote all these extra files and stuff. I'm going to create a new group and call it extensions. And I'm going to create a file in here. I'm going to call it query plus ext for extension. And I'm just going to cut this import combine in the query and paste it in there because that is probably better. And I think we need to import the Firestore and import Firestore. And then also that view modifier that we just made, that should not be in this favorites view. So let's create another group here and we'll call this component. And we'll create a subfolder called view modifiers. So anything that is a view modifier, we will put in that folder. And I will create a new file called OnFirstAppear view modifier. Let's cut this, put it into that file, import SwiftUI. Let's create a new file for the favorite view model just to clean this up a little bit. I will cut this. Look how nice and condensed and short our view is. It's beautiful. Beautiful, guys. Gorgeous. And I think we maybe have to do that for some of these other ones as well. So the products view model, let's create a new file. Cut that in here. Are we done? Favorites view. I think we're done now. Okay. Utilities, products database, authentication, Firestore. Awesome. Run our app, make sure it still works. We are staying super organized. And we are becoming expert developers. We're literally becoming masters of Firebase. I will note that this section was probably the hardest section. Oh, we got to import SwiftUI here as well. Try one more time. This was definitely the most difficult section of the course, so it's going to get easier after this, I can promise you. But this was the bread and butter of Firebase. This is like how to set up your database, how to manage your data. Oftentimes the hardest part of the app development process is managing this part. In the next video, we are not going to actually write any more Firestore code, but we are going to look at the rules for our Cloud Firestore database. And so the rules are what basically determine who is allowed to read and write at which locations in our database. And we'll talk about that in the next video. Thank you guys for watching. As always, I am Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking. You are on your way to becoming an expert iOS developer. And if you want to continue that streak, I will see you in the next video.